There was a river, and in the cold nights of March it carried a black kind of light. The time was March 28, 1942, a little after 1 in the morning. On France's western coast, the port of Saint-Nazaire slept under a lid of darkness, or at least it looked that way. The Loire River emptied into the Bay of Biscay here, broad water framed by the silhouettes of piers, cranes, and warehouses. Even in wartime, the harbour had its usual smells: salt, fuel, wet rope, old paint. But at this hour, those familiar details felt muted, swallowed by fog and distance. The visible world was reduced to geometry: hard edges of concrete, black lines of cranes, and the pale sweep of occasional light. The port's stillness was a disguise of its own, a quiet surface covering men at posts and weapons already set. Among all the structures along the banks, one dominated the skyline, the largest and most conspicuous of them all. A massive form like a concrete coffin, the Normandie Dock. It was the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast capable of taking a 40,000-ton ship. At this moment it stood empty, a blunt fact that changed nothing about its value. Its gates were shut tight, a silent mouth clamped closed, and the scale of the structure made the surrounding wharves look like props. A dock like this did not earn its strategic importance by what it held tonight, but by what it could hold tomorrow, and by the repairs and protection it could offer when steel came back battered from the sea. Out in the blackness near the river's mouth, a few darker shapes were moving. No lights, engines muffled to a minimum. A small flotilla, 18 vessels in all. At the front was a warship with a strange outline. From a distance it looked like a German torpedo boat. The angle of its funnel, the lines of its bridge, all carefully altered to sell the disguise. But close enough, you could still make out letters on the bow, painted down but not erased. HMS Campbeltown. Campbeltown. An old Royal Navy destroyer, launched in 1919, meant to end her life in a scrapyard. Tonight, she was a key about to be driven into the lock of the Normandie Dock's caisson gate. On the bridge, the commander, Robert Ryder, held night binoculars to his eyes. The shoreline's contours sharpened in the faint light. They had to creep 8 kilometers upriver, quietly, until the target was within range, not gun range, but ramming distance. The plan depended on deception and shock, on buying a few precious minutes. "Keep formation. Speed 10 knots. His voice was low, but each word landed like a nail. Behind him, more than 200 commandos crouched on decks and in cramped compartments, checking weapons and demolition packs. No one spoke, only breathing and the small clicks of gear against metal. The river lay calm. Searchlights swept the distance from time to time. Every time a beam passed, a heartbeat seemed to vanish, once, twice. They even managed to fool a German patrol craft that came in to check them, answering with fluent German signal lamp code, friendly vessel, routine patrol. But luck, like the fog of a spring night, was thinning fast. With less than 3 kilometers to go, the first searchlight snapped on like a pale finger from the right bank and stabbed straight into Campbeltown's bridge. Then a second beam, a third from different directions, converging until the ship was pinned inside a cage of light. The disguise had failed. Alarms tore the night open. Not one siren, but a chorus, overlapping, shrieking from every direction. Then, as if a single order had been given, at least a dozen firing points on both banks erupted at once. Machine gun fire stitched bright lines across the water, a golden weave that became a net of death. Small-caliber shells began to fall, blasting up white columns of water around the ships. Campbeltown took the first blows. Bullets hammered the steel plating with a dense, hail-like clatter, punctuated by deeper thuds as armor-piercing rounds punched in. Sparks flew from the superstructure. An oil tank was hit, and flames leapt up in a sudden roar. Campbeltown did not slow. She did not turn away. Ryder's order went down through the voice pipe. "Full speed. Take her in." In the engine room, the temperature spiked. Sailors stripped to the waist, working in deafening machinery noise and choking fumes, shoving the throttles forward to the stops. The old destroyer shuddered. Her frame groaned under the strain, but her speed climbed, 12 knots, 15, and then on toward her limit, close to 20. Dragging fire and smoke, she drove straight ahead like a wounded beast that refused to fall, charging down a corridor of light toward an immense shadow that swelled larger with every second. That shadow was the Normandie Dock's gate, A giant of steel and concrete, thousands of tons of mass, what the Germans called a caisson. It was the dock's doorway and the strategic heart of Saint-Nazaire. Inside Campbeltown's bow, behind a layer of concrete reinforcement, 24 modified depth charges waited, a total of 4.5 tons of high explosive. Their time fuses had been set before leaving the British coast. The collision would be only the next instruction. One ship, more than 600 lives, a deliberate ramming into a fortified gate. It sounded like something from ancient war or the madness of desperation. But the men who planned it, from Admiralty staff to frontline commanders, were not mad. They were calm to the point of coldness, because they understood that the target was not merely a gate. It was a strategic node, and that node controlled the leash on something far more dangerous, the German battleship Tirpitz. That beast lurked in northern waters, watching the Atlantic's lifeline. With every meter Campbeltown advanced, the invisible lock on Tirpitz tightened another notch. For a moment, leave the burning river and look at the broader chessboard. In the spring of 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its bloodiest phase. German U-boats had refined wolfpack tactics to an art. Allied convoy losses hit new monthly highs. Day after day, merchant ships of 10,000 tons went down with cargo and men into black, freezing sea. Britain, dependent on maritime supply, felt its throat being squeezed. Every convoy was a calculation of tonnage and time, and every loss echoed forward into shortages, slower production, and thinner margins at the front. But submarines were not the only threat. On the surface, the German Navy still held a card that terrified planners. Tirpitz. Sister ship to Bismarck, she carried 8 380mm guns, heavy armor, and speed enough to choose her fights. She did not need to hide like a submarine. She was a moving symbol of power, the kind that could make an admiral feel helpless. Tirpitz was based in Norwegian fjords, a sword hanging overhead. The British home fleet had to keep a significant portion of its strength, especially precious carriers and battleships, tied to the north to guard against her breaking out into the Atlantic. If the beast ever reached the convoy routes, merchantmen with inadequate heavy escort would be like sheep before a tiger. So Tirpitz was a strategic threat, a fleet in being. Much of her power lay in the fact that she might appear in the Atlantic anywhere, at any time. That possibility forced the British to plan defensively and to keep heavy ships tied down, even when those ships would have been useful elsewhere. Yet even the strongest battleship was not invincible. She could be damaged. She needed maintenance. In heavy seas or in combat, even a minor hit could cost her fighting ability. When that happened, she needed a safe haven, a dry dock large enough and advanced enough to take her. Without that guarantee, a sortie became a gamble with only two outcomes: triumph or a slow, vulnerable retreat under pursuit. A battleship's guns mattered, but so did the ability to bring her back inside walls, drain the water away, and make her whole again. Along the German-occupied coast of Western Europe, from the Norwegian fjords down to the Bay of Biscay, there was only one place that met that requirement: the Normandie Dock at Saint-Nazaire. The dock had originally been built for the great liner Normandie, and its scale was staggering. 350 meters long, 50 meters wide, it could swallow Tirpitz easily. For the Germans, Saint-Nazaire was not just an occupied port. It was the insurance policy, the repair station that made it thinkable to risk the battleship on a major Atlantic raid. With that dock available, naval leadership could consider unleashing the beast at the decisive moment to deliver a killing blow to the supply lines. British naval intelligence and planners drew the chain of logic with clarity. On the map, Saint-Nazaire was circled in thick red pencil. The conclusion was simple and brutal. As long as the Normandie Dock remained operational, Tirpitz's strategic threat could not be truly neutralized. Cripple the dock, and you fasten an invisible shackle on Tirpitz, raising the cost and risk of any attempt to break out. The aim was not to hunt the battleship across an ocean, but to remove the safety net that made the gamble conceivable. The goal shifted from sinking a battleship to disabling the core function of a port. An indirect strike, but potentially a more effective one. It was a way to change the enemy's decision-making without needing to win a fleet action. If the dock could not be used, then the battleship's freedom to roam narrowed, no matter how intact her armor remained. The question was, how? A major air raid. In 1942, bombing accuracy was not good enough to guarantee the destruction of a reinforced concrete target, and the losses and civilian casualties would be severe. A conventional amphibious assault to seize the port? That required division-level forces, a full-scale battle, no surprise, and far more capability than Britain could spare. The answer had to be surgical, sudden, precise, and willing to pay any price. In a secure, secret room, the plan that became Operation Chariot was born. Bold and simple, with a grim, classical sense of tragedy. Take an old ship, pack it with explosives, and ram it into the gate. At the center was the key, HMS Campbeltown. She was chosen because she was old, obsolete, and therefore expendable. More importantly, her size and structure suited modification. She was sent into a Devon shipyard for a transformation that took weeks. First came the disguise. To fool German observation posts at night, Campbeltown's silhouette was altered to resemble a MOVA-class torpedo boat. The aft funnel was removed. The forward funnel was rebuilt to a specific slant. Unneeded masts, davits, and fittings were stripped away. The hull was painted in the drab grey camouflage used by German vessels along the French coast. From a distance, she looked convincing. Second came the reinforcement for impact. Her bow was gutted and filled with hundreds of tons of concrete, forming a hard ram. It increased the force of the collision and shielded the most important cargo behind it. That cargo sat just aft of the concrete. Workers carefully mounted 24 standard Mark 7 depth charges into a special framework. These anti-submarine weapons had their pressure triggers removed and were fitted with delayed fusing. Total explosive charge, 4.5 tons. To magnify the blast, engineers stacked hundreds of oxygen cylinders around the charges so that the explosion would throw lethal secondary fragments. The fuses were set to detonate 8 hours after impact. The timing was calculated with care, enough time for the commandos to complete their shore tasks and attempt withdrawal, and enough time for German forces, after the fighting eased, to relax, even to board the ship as a prize and inspect it. That, too, was part of the plan. The delay was a weapon in itself, turning the ship into a promise that would be kept long after the last shots of the night. Campbeltown was no longer a warship. She was a floating timed bomb built for one target. Her mission was singular: ram, then wait for annihilation, taking the target with her. The men aboard could still fight and maneuver, but the real authority now belonged to the unseen clock, steady and indifferent. A key alone was not enough. After the door was forced, men had to go inside and smash the machinery. That was the commando mission. More than 200 volunteers from the British Army and Royal Marines underwent intense training, recognizing port facilities from diagrams, placing specialized demolition charges, close-range fighting, and surviving and hiding behind enemy lines. Their target list was specific: the dock's pump house, the power workshop, the gate's hydraulic control room, and other auxiliary installations in the port. Each team carried charges tailored to its assignment. The raid force was a composite flotilla. Campbeltown served as flagship and bomb. With her came 2 escorting destroyers that would provide fire support near the river mouth and take aboard wounded, plus 16 small craft, including motor gunboats and motor torpedo boats. These fast, light vessels had multiple roles, carrying some of the commandos, providing close-in suppressive fire, and above all, extracting the raiders once their work was done. The timetable was measured in minutes: enter the river, push upstream, strike the gate around 1:30 a.m., land the commandos immediately. Complete major demolitions by 2:30, begin withdrawal before 3 o'clock, clear the channel before dawn and rendezvous for the run back to Britain. It was a tightly linked plan, and as fragile as glass. Any failure, disguise exposed too soon, the ram missing, demolition teams delayed, evacuation craft destroyed, could turn it into catastrophe. There was no backup plan. Everyone understood it was almost a one-way trip. No one stepped back, because the target was worth the wager. Return now to the river at Saint-Nazaire, that strip of water lit as bright as a stage and turned into hell. Campbeltown, burning, had reached an astonishing 19 knots. Behind and alongside her, the light craft were being shredded. Thin hulls that could not stop machine gun fire caught rounds and burst into flame. Vessels lost power and spun on the water. Some boats carrying commandos were sunk before they could reach shore. But Campbeltown looked only forward. In the lattice of searchlights, bullets and shells erupted around her in endless water plumes. The bridge windows had already been blown out. The helmsman held the course by feel and experience, fighting the wheel, 500 meters, 300, 100. Every man aboard, sailors and commandos alike, grabbed the strongest thing within reach. The collision was unavoidable. At 1:34 a.m., with a sound beyond language, metal tearing, wood splintering, concrete cracking, Campbeltown's concrete-reinforced bow struck the caisson gate at an almost vertical angle, smashing into the lower section. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The ship's massive inertia drove thousands of tons forward. Then the hull shook violently, as if seized by a giant hand. Steel screamed as it twisted. The forward structure, at least 10 meters of it, crumpled like tin, wedging deep into the gate's steel framework. The stern lifted with the momentum, then slammed back down into the water. The ram had worked. On the bridge, Ryder was flung forward, his forehead split, but he grabbed the voice pipe at once. "Report damage. Check the firing circuit." Reports came fast. The bow was wrecked, but the critical compartment holding the charges appeared intact. Forward spaces were flooding, but with the ship jammed into the gate, there was no immediate risk of sinking. Most important, the fuse circuits were live. The countdown continued. The first stage had been executed as planned. Campbeltown became a burning bridge of steel connecting river and dock gate, but at the same time, the most dangerous phase was just beginning. The crash and the shock woke the German garrison. More searchlights snapped on. More firing points joined the barrage. Fire that had concentrated on Campbeltown now spread across the river and the quay. The small craft trying to land became targets in a shooting gallery. As one surviving motorboat commander recalled after the war, it felt like entering a hive full of flashbulbs, each beam pointing out death. Bullets came from everywhere, hammering hulls, water, men. Orders, shouts, explosions merged into noise. You acted on instinct. Even so, the commandos began to move. From Campbeltown's relatively intact stern and from the few boats that managed to reach the quay, raiders plunged into waist-deep water or clambered directly onto the dock. Soaked and weighted with weapons and explosives, they ran in dispersed formation through thick fire toward their assigned buildings. German response grew more organized by the minute. Beyond fixed emplacements, infantry patrols poured out from barracks to seal streets and encircle the landing area. Skirmishing in the port quickly escalated into fierce, close combat among warehouses, rails, and concrete. The raiders knew they had to be fast. They had minutes, not hours, before the enemy massed in full strength. Behind them, Campbeltown remained jammed into the gate, flames lighting her shattered hull. In the unseen dark, the timer advanced with steady indifference toward its end. For those who made it ashore, the mission was only half complete. They had turned the key. Now they had to find the mechanisms inside the lock, smash them, and then find a way out that barely existed. Saint-Nazaire's port district became a vast, chaotic maze in the small hours of March 28th. One side was hard concrete buildings, crisscrossing rail lines, and the shadow of huge cranes. The other side was the German garrison waking, angry, and closing in. Commando teams, 5 to 10 men each, scattered through the maze. They had no maps, only memorized target descriptions and bearings. Explosions and gunfire came from every direction. Communications were mostly gone. Each group became an island, relying on rehearsed coordination and whatever leadership could be improvised under fire. But training mattered. Lieutenant Stuart Chant and his group had a clear objective: the dock pump house. It was the dock's heart. The massive electric pumps that could drain millions of gallons of seawater so ships could sit for repairs. Destroy it, and the dock's usefulness collapsed. They moved along shadows, avoiding searchlit roads. The pump house was a solid brick building with a sentry at the door. A short, controlled burst dropped him. They pushed inside. The interior roared with machinery and smelled of oil. Huge pumps turned under dim light. The raiders found key control cabinets and motors and fixed on magnetized-shaped charges designed to focus explosive force and tear thick metal casings. They set short fuses and withdrew. Seconds later, muffled blasts thumped from within. Glass shattered. Black smoke rolled from doors and windows. The machine roar died, replaced by the groan of twisted metal and the crackle of electrical shorts. The pump house was crippled. Similar scenes played out across the port. Another team destroyed the gate's hydraulic control room so that even if repairs were attempted later, the gate could not operate normally. Other groups struck a substation and fuel storage tanks, igniting fires that added confusion and hindered German movement. But German counterattack intensified. Not only port guards but field units from nearby camps began to converge. They knew the terrain. Their firepower was heavy. They gradually split the raiders into isolated pockets and pressed them down. More deadly still, the withdrawal plan was collapsing. The main extraction point was near the old entrance quay. According to the plan, demolition teams would regroup there and be taken off by surviving motorcraft. When the first exhausted commandos fought their way to the rendezvous, their stomachs dropped. On the river, only a handful of small boats were still trying to make the run through concentrated fire. More extraction craft had already been sunk, badly damaged and dead in the water, or forced to pull back because their commanders were killed or wounded. German forces had built a dense curtain of fire along the quay. Any boat that tried to come in became an easy mark. A signalman tried to reach headquarters. What came back, broken and bleak, was worse than silence. Extraction losses were severe. The boats could not meet the plan. Teams were to find their own way out. Find your own way out. Deep in enemy territory, everyone understood what that meant. Some officers tried to organize a defensive position and hold for rescue, but the German ring tightened. Ammunition ran down, casualties climbed. Reality forced a harsher choice. Split up, attempt to break through in small groups, try to hide or fight to the end. Individual fates diverged. In the confusion and despair, the kind of courage the Victoria Cross is meant to capture flashed in several corners. After Campbeltown struck, the motor torpedo boat MTB-74 had a special assignment: to fire additional torpedoes at the gate if the ram failed. Once the collision succeeded, it could have withdrawn. Instead, its captain drove deeper into the port, using the boat's light guns to suppress shore fire and buy time for the landings. The craft darted back and forth under a storm of bullets until it was riddled and sank. The captain and most of the crew were killed. On shore, the story of able seaman William Alfred Savage became part of the official record. A gunner on a motor gunboat, he manned an exposed Oerlikon cannon, a position the Germans targeted relentlessly. Under sustained direct fire, he stayed unnaturally calm, firing with precision to cover comrades until he was killed. His commander later wrote that Savage's gun was one of the few lights on that black river that still pointed a way forward and still hurt the enemy. But such flashes of bravery could not open a path for everyone. For most raiders trapped ashore, the hours before dawn became a cycle of hiding among rubble, short, violent clashes in alleys, and waiting for help that would never arrive. When the eastern sky began to pale, gunfire in Saint-Nazaire thinned. German forces controlled most of the area and began systematic clearing. Some commandos, out of ammunition, surrendered. A few found hiding places left by the French resistance. More were killed in last stands. In the center of the port, Campbeltown's wreck still sat jammed in the gate, smoke trailing upward like a memorial that had not yet finished its final rite. Day arrived over Saint-Nazaire on March 28th. For the German garrison commander, the situation may have looked stabilized. The British raid had been driven off. Most raiders were dead or captured. Facilities had been damaged, but the dock's main gate seemed only rammed and dented, not destroyed. That could even be spun as a successful defense. In the morning, battlefield cleanup began. German soldiers gathered around the dock, staring at the enemy ship embedded in the caisson. Naval technicians and engineers were ordered aboard what was left of Campbeltown to assess damage and search for intelligence value, and perhaps to understand why the ship's bow had been so hard. No one knew, or if anyone suspected, they could not change it. Deep inside the twisted steel and concrete, a mechanical timer ticked with cold precision towards 0. After 10 in the morning, more Germans boarded the wreck. Not only technicians, but officers and men from other units who wanted to see the spectacle for themselves. French witnesses later said a significant crowd gathered in the area. At 10:35 a.m., there was first a low tremor, a dull thump that seemed to rise from beneath the ground. Then came the true blast. 24 depth charges and the stacked oxygen cylinders detonated together. The 4.5 tons of explosive tore through what remained of Campbeltown in an instant. A massive fireball packed with flame, smoke, and fragments erupted at the gate and rose into the sky, swelling into a terrifying mushroom cloud. The shockwave was annihilating. The heavy steel and concrete caisson gate was smashed to pieces. Huge chunks flew hundreds of meters. The entrance became a ruin of twisted metal, shattered concrete, and churning seawater. Campbeltown herself, except for a small portion of the strongest aft structure, was almost vaporized. The blast did more than destroy the gate. Vibration and pressure damaged the dock walls and what remained of the pump installations. A dock of this scale depended on more than raw concrete. It depended on a gate that could seal, walls that could hold the pressure difference, machinery that could drain and control the basin, and systems that could be trusted to work under heavy load. When those elements were cracked, twisted, and burned out, the dock might still look recognizable from a distance, but its practical function was gone. The human toll was equally stark. The German personnel aboard and around Campbeltown were killed in the blast, shredded by fragments or crushed by shockwave. Post-war estimates vary, from 200 to 400 dead. Many accounts cite a broadly accepted figure of more than 350. A number of the dead were experienced naval technical officers and engineers, a heavy loss for the German Navy. The delayed explosion changed the tone of Saint-Nazaire completely. For the Germans, it was no longer a story of successfully repelling a raid, but a costly defense with humiliation attached. The port's core capability had been removed, and at a severe price in trained personnel. For Britain, the commando force had been nearly wiped out, but the strategic aim had been achieved in a dramatic, irreversible way. Days later, a Royal Air Force Spitfire reconnaissance aircraft passed high over Saint-Nazaire. Its photographs were rushed to processing and laid on desks at the Admiralty. The images showed the dock gate area reduced to jagged ruin and floating debris. Campbeltown's wreck was essentially gone. In the dock entrance was a huge black breach like a wound that would not heal. The photographs offered the cold clarity planners needed, not a heroic tableau, but proof that the key feature of the port had been rendered unusable. The physical lock was broken. The historical judgment, the moral accounting, and the long echo of the raid were only beginning. The direct strategic consequences were clear and far-reaching. Crippling the Normandie Dock forced the German Navy to reassess, seriously, the risks of employing Tirpitz. Without nearby heavy repair support, any plan to send her deep into the Atlantic looked reckless. The battleship could still threaten, but the threat became harder to cash in. When you remove the place where damage can be reversed, you do not need to win every encounter. You make the enemy fear the one encounter that leaves him limping with nowhere safe to mend. For the remaining years of the war, Tirpitz spent most of her time sheltered in complex defenses in Norway, a true fleet in being, useful mainly for tying down British naval strength rather than striking directly. In November 1944, British aircraft sank her at anchor with heavy tallboy bombs. She died without delivering a decisive blow to the North Atlantic convoy lifeline. The destroyed lock at Saint-Nazaire played a key role in constraining her options over the long term. Measured purely by the achievement of its operational objective, Operation Chariot was an astonishing success. It used a costly but precise raid to solve a strategic problem conventional forces could not easily solve, turning a small strike into disproportionate effect. In Western military history, it is often described as one of the greatest raids and remains a classic case study in special operations and joint planning. It demonstrated a harsh principle of leverage. The right target is not always the biggest ship, but the point that allows the biggest ship to take risks. Britain honored the participants at the highest level. In May 1942, King George VI approved an unprecedented set of awards for Saint-Nazaire. 5 Victoria Crosses, the most ever given for a single action, tied with one other operation. Those 5 VCs went to Commander Robert Ryder of the Royal Navy, the overall commander who brought Campbeltown in for the ram; able seaman William Savage of the Royal Navy, a motor gunboat gunner who fought in an exposed position until he was killed; Lieutenant Colonel Augustus Newman of the Army, the senior commando officer ashore who led amid extreme confusion; Captain Robert Patton of the Army, who led a team that destroyed key targets and fought with outstanding courage when escape became impossible; Sergeant Thomas Durrant of the Army, who continued fighting while badly wounded, helped comrades, and was ultimately captured. Their citations appeared in the London Gazette, written in a calm, objective voice with no theatrical flourish, recording moments that went beyond life and death. The words themselves became part of the hard core of the story, a record of discipline under fire as much as bravery. But the glitter of medals could not erase another ledger, heavier in its totals. Honors can name exemplary acts, but they cannot soften the arithmetic of a plan that accepted catastrophic losses as part of its design. Of the 611 British personnel who took part in Operation Chariot, 169 were confirmed killed, about 28%. 215 were captured, and about 5 later died of wounds in prisoner-of-war camps. Only 227 returned safely to Britain, many of them from vessels that never penetrated deep into the port or that withdrew earlier. Of the 18 light naval craft engaged, only 4 returned, 2 destroyers and 2 motorboats. In other words, the commandos and their close escort, the force that entered the harbour to execute the core mission, were almost entirely destroyed. Many of those captured spent the rest of the war in German prison camps. So Saint-Nazaire is never a simple victory song. It is a complex shape. One face is strategic success and a display of military skill at the highest edge. Another is the personal cost, the shattered families and the weight of sacrifice. Another is the enduring question of war's ethics and the calculus of price. The story survives because it contains both the clean logic of strategy and the unclean reality of what that logic demanded. The raid influenced later thinking on special operations. It proved that high-value point targets could be struck with surprise, and it showed in blood how fragile such missions were, especially at the extraction phase, and how catastrophic the cost could become. It taught later planners that you can design a perfect raid, but you must be prepared to pay for an imperfect ending. The smoke of that war is long gone, and Saint-Nazaire's facilities were rebuilt after the conflict. But the history was not forgotten. The dead are named on memorials. Survivors' accounts sit in archives. The 5 Victoria Cross citations still transmit a definition of courage that outlives their era. When later generations speak of a great raid, they are not talking only about a dock gate blown apart. They are talking about the decision to seal one critical option for the enemy by turning oneself into a single-use weapon. They are talking about a collective will that drove into a corridor of searchlights, knowing survival was unlikely. Legends are heavy because they are forged from 2 metals, the thunder of an explosion that shattered a massive gate, and the 169 names that did not come home, followed by a long silent mark left by the lock that was broken. In the end, the raid is remembered less for what it destroyed than for what it denied. It denied the enemy a refuge, a repair station, a reassurance that risk could be managed once the guns fell silent. It narrowed a battleship's choices by breaking a single gateway, and it did so at a price that refuses to become abstract.